Welcome to Fear and Greed, the week ahead. As always, with economist Stephen Koukoulas. You'll find him at thekouk.com, TheKouk.com, and on Twitter using the handle thekouk. Stephen, good morning.
Good morning to you, Sean.
Now, there hasn't been a lot of data around, but wow, the stuff that came out last week, there was one day in particular, I think it was Thursday, where we got the Fed moving on interest rates. We had an incredible employment figure in Australia. What do you make of all that? Let's start with the Fed. What did you think of that announcement? They lifted interest rates 25 basis points, but they made it fairly clear outline of what they're going to do.
They did. And in a way, there was no surprise when we look at what's happened to the US economy in the, I won't call it the post-COVID environment, but as we're learning to live with COVID environment, they've got unemployment, below 4%. They've got CPI inflation at 7.9%. Goodness me. They've got wages growth picking up, and they had, until last Thursday, the Fed funds rate at 0.25%, which was clearly too low. So they came out and hiked 25 basis points. And as you alluded to, they've signalled very clearly that there's going to be a rate hike at every committee meeting between now and year end, and probably a few more into 2023. So when we take a step back, digest what they said and did, it's the start of a monetary policy tightening cycle. We'll probably see at this stage, as far as we can forecast beyond a few months, we'll probably see another 200 basis points of rate hikes from the US, and then we will wait and see whether that's enough to contain these inflation pressures.
Okay, let's move on to the local labour market. Very strong figures, employment figures last Thursday.
Oh, as an economist, I get thrills when I see the labour market numbers this strong. We had 77,000 jobs created in the month of February. The unemployment rate fell to 4.0%, which is 0.1% from being at the lowest level since 1974. Wow. Not many people listening to this would have been born back in 1974, I'm sure. Yeah. And we did see that...
Some of us were, Stephen.
Indeed, I was too. But, we had an incredible lift in the participation rate. The underemployment rate fell by another 0.1%. So when you cut and dice those numbers, they were remarkably strong, and they fit with all of the anecdotes that we've been hearing for 6 months or so, that the labour market is tight, that businesses can't find the talent that they need, and they can't find the skilled or even unskilled workers that they need. So it's showing up in these labour force numbers in spades that we're seeing a really dynamic labour market unfold before our eyes. And I think the question now for financial markets and our friends at the Reserve Bank will be, does this actually show a pickup in labour costs coming down the track? I think the answer is yes, unambiguously. And then, of course, what's that mean for inflation and the future of monetary policy? So, lovely to see good employment numbers. It brings a tear to my eye, a happy tear, that is.
So, Stephen, you mentioned that those labour force numbers will make the Reserve Bank take notice and think about the pressures on wages and, of course, interest rates. What do you think will happen? There must be an incredible amount of pressure within Martin Place to do something.
Oh, look, I think the pressure is very strong now. And again, it's not to say that there's anything necessarily sinister going on. Of course, there probably isn't. But when they sit down and take a step back and they see the labour market doing what it's doing, I think they can put their hand on their heart and say, hooray, we've achieved full employment. And that's a great thing. They can probably see that the next couple of inflation numbers will be very elevated, not just in headline terms with petrol prices and these sorts of things filtering into the measure of inflation, but in underlying terms, we've got to see inflation pressure building. And the question that I keep coming back to when I look at the RBA and look at what their policy pressures are, if you like, is a 0.1% cash rate appropriate for 2022, remembering that they cut rates to 0.1% when they thought unemployment would be going towards 10%, when they thought inflation would be hovering around 1.5%. And here we are in early 2022. And as we've just been discussing, the labour market numbers have blown those forecasts way out of the water. And as we're saying, inflation's picking up. So the answer is no, the 0.1% is not appropriate. It's the question about how they start to sway the markets or inform the markets that interest rate hikes are coming, and perhaps sooner than the market's currently thinking.
I think under previous governors who have thought about targeting inflation, Glenn Stevens, certainly Ian Macfarlane, the difference between those guys and Philip Lowe now, Philip Lowe wants to actually see inflation at a certain level and wage growth at a certain level before moving, whereas previously they always moved ahead of time. That seems to be a big difference this time around?
Oh, that's a really pertinent point. I'm old enough to remember both Glenn Stevens and Ian Macfarlane and their preemptive monetary policy settings that they would look. It takes a bit of courage because you're hiking or cutting rates on anticipation of the economy strengthening or weakening. So, in a sense, there is a bit of a risky strategy there when there was that preemptive policy. And to be fair, I think that both Stevens and Macfarlane did a pretty good job. That they hiked and generally got the pressures right. Although I think there was one example where the economy didn't unfold as they expected, but they reversed it. See, that's the beauty about monetary policy. Yeah. The board meets every month, and if you make a mistake, in inverted commas, this month, then you can reverse it next month, and you don't lose credibility. Whereas Philip Lowe seems to be saying, well, I need to see the writing on the wall, actual inflation, wages, labour market conditions being so strong that justifies a rate hike. And I think that's a slightly more risky strategy in many ways, because does he let the cat out of the bag by holding off rate hikes when perhaps, as we're seeing in the US and New Zealand and Bank of England and Bank of Canada where they've already hiked, is he waiting just a bit too long?
Okay. Now, he's talking this week at the Walkley Awards, which is the annual journalist award show. What a crowd for Phil Lowe to have to stand in front of a bunch of journalists when they're all going to be critical of what he's doing on monetary policy.
Yes, the Q&A might be interesting, or even just the conversation at the main table where no doubt he's going to be sitting. So I think there'll be a fair bit of pressure on him. And look, again, it's just a chance for him to be a bit more reflective and as I said, to celebrate the good economic news, not being critical of them for getting it wrong, again in inverted commas, but to just sort of say that we've achieved our full employment objective way earlier than we thought, and that's a good thing. And, 0.1% is not a sign of a good economy, and we actually have a pretty good economy right now, so we need to move away from that 0.1% official cash rate.
Stephen, have a great week.
You too, Sean. Thanks.
That was economist Stephen Koukoulas, better known as The Kouk. You can find him at thekouk.com and follow him on Twitter using the handle The Kouk. I'm Sean Aylmer, and this is Fear and Greed, the week ahead.